in it. And that's what we're doing with this budget.
And now Congressman Dennis Kucinich, a friend of Scoreboard, has presented a plan to temporarily reduce the age to receive Social Security from 62 down to 60, which would let an estimated 4 million people leave their jobs and begin collecting early benefits. Does this make sense, or is it more of the same? Well, let's ask Congressman Kucinich. He is a Democrat from Ohio. Also with us, Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, and he is also from Ohio. All right, Dennis Kucinich, explain to us, those of us who are very weary of government involvement and government expenditure of funds, why your proposal makes sense.
Well, we could create 1 million new jobs, and that's what I call the proposal, the million jobs proposal, by letting people who are currently age 60, but not age 62 when they can take an early retirement, letting people between 60 and 62 take an early retirement. We estimate about 1 million people would take that, and those people would then create job openings, which would then be filled by people in the ranks, and then you move another 1 million people in. It's not going to solve all the unemployment problems in the country. There's a lot more things we have to do, but it's a way to create 1 million jobs, and frankly, you know, it's a better idea than anybody else has offered up to this point.
But Congressman Kucinich, and then I'll let Congressman Jordan come in, you're also creating a lot more expenses for the taxpayer, because suddenly you have millions more Americans who need much more government assistance than they now have. Congressman Kucinich?
No. Well, actually, we're using two sources of funds that are currently not being used for this purpose. One would be TARP funds that haven't been used. I voted against TARP, but I think this is probably the only area that the funds could be useful. And the other one is unexpended funds in the stimulus package. This would be a way to it's a cheap way to create jobs.
Cheap?
And create 1 million jobs.
We're talking about
absolutely,
how much more would that cost?
Do you know how much it costs to create a job otherwise? You can create a job, maybe $30,000, $40,000. These jobs are created about $15,000
It's not created, though, when the real process of creation takes place in the private sector, not in the government sector. Congressman Jordan, go ahead.
If that's true, why do we have 15 million people out of work?
Look, if big government spending and big government planning were going to get us out of this mess, we'd have been out of it a long time ago. That's all this administration and, frankly, all this Congress wants to focus on. Unfortunately, the Democrats seem to think our economy is some big zero-sum game, some finite pie, and they get to divide up the pieces, and you have government jobs, and we'll create those, and it doesn't work that way. What we need to do is get the spending under control. The American people get that. Bring the tax burden down on the real job creators, the small business owners out there, and let the marketplace, let the American people, let the entrepreneur, let the American spirit take hold. Right now, most business leaders, most business owners are scared. They're afraid, is cap and trade going to happen? Is this federal takeover of health care going to happen? Are we going to have more proposals like my friend from Ohio here has? They're afraid, and so they're holding, and we're not seeing the economic growth that we would like to be seeing out there. Big government planning, big government spending doesn't work. We've tried it for a year and a half.
Why do we have 15 million people out of work? You think the government put them out of work? It's the private sector let the people go. How can you say the private sector is going to be the solution when they're putting people out of work?
What we know is the government's not the solution, because we have tried big government spending. As David indicated at the top of the hour, we have got, for the next 10 years, the Obama budget. I just came from the budget hearing. For the next 10 years, they run, on average, $1 trillion deficit each year. That's the average deficit. Tell me how the Americans instinctively know that will not work. That will not create jobs. And more big government planning from Washington, D.C., where everyone around here seems to think they're smarter than business owners and the American people, they know that won't work either. What works is letting business owners have more of their money to spend and invest in the people they want to employ.
I'm all for business, but when you got George Bush, and we got to remember, there's bailouts, wars,
and I was against them just like you were.
Okay, but bailouts, wars, and tax cuts, no wonder we have a deficit. The government has to prime the pump of the economy right now. We have to invest in jobs, education, health care, and when we do that, we put America back to work. If we wait for the private sector to create the jobs, we're out of luck.
Dennis, you know, every time it's been tried, it works. When you let the American people keep more of their money versus this plan, which is give us your money, we'll figure it all out, and we'll hand it out to those special interests we think make sense. That doesn't work. What we know works is letting people keep more of their money to spend on their goals, their dreams, and create the jobs and foster economic growth in our economy.
I agree with you. Let people keep more of their money, but let them have a job so they have money to keep.
Okay, geez, I thought I was I was taking a little nap here while you two were at it because you were so good. But let me stimulate you a little bit further, Dennis Kucinich, and ask, Where has it worked? Where do we have an example of the government creating jobs that really last, meaningful jobs that create something for the entire economy, other than maybe special cases like NASA's space program or something like
transportation, that? No transportation program. The New Deal's a classic case. We rebuilt America
the New Deal was successful?
For a whole generation. Absolutely. Are you kidding?
No, I'm not kidding, because a lot of people dispute that it was successful.
It saved capitalism.
David, with their stimulus plan, David, with their stimulus plan, they've had to redefine now what a job created or saved is. Now they're saying any job that any local government, I talked to a school treasurer yesterday, any job that, wherever they've spent the money, they now have to define that as a job saved or created. It's whether it would have been created or saved or not. That's how ridiculous it has gotten with the stimulus plan last February, and now we have this stimulus plan and another one coming from the Obama administration.
The stimulus was inadequate.
$787 billion of taxpayer dollars adding to the deficit and debt was inadequate.
$100 billion of it went for job creation and infrastructure rebuilding. We need to repair over $3 trillion in infrastructure in this country. And the private sector can't do that. This is an investment in the private sector. It is an investment in government. America needs to repair its infrastructure.
Dennis, can't you see, though, what has been happening across the country, at least in the 3 elections we've seen so far? The American appetite for more government spending has dried up. American people don't want it. They want the government to pull back, not to push in.
Look, if the public sector was creating the jobs, if the public sector hadn't created this mess we're in, which is we're out 15 million jobs at least. And so if the private sector says
the private sector, the government had nothing to do with that.
No, these things work synergistically. You know, when you have a bailout and Wall Street collapsing, a lot of jobs got lost in that.
Well, it's synergistic because there are a lot of people in the corporate sector, there are a lot of business people who like government help, who like government welfare, corporate welfare, and that's part of the problem. And I got to give you credit, Dennis. That's one of the things that you are against, this corporate welfare. So I give you credit on that. Yeah. But again, the public appetite isn't there. What you are proposing is something that the American people don't want.
It's called leadership, and it's called the willingness
even if it's against the wishes of the people?
No, you have to explain to people that the private sector, many of the people who are watching right now, if they've lost their job, they didn't lose a government job, they lost a job in the private sector. If the private sector isn't creating jobs, what are we supposed to do?
But here's your point.
What are we supposed to do?
Dennis is, and he's a good guy, God bless him for his passion, but he doesn't get what so many other people in Capitol Hill doesn't get, and that is the American people are smart. They've figured it out. We have seen the Tea Party phenomenon. We saw the town hall meetings. We saw New Jersey, Virginia. We've seen what happened in Massachusetts a couple weeks ago. The American people figured it out, and they understand big government spending doesn't work. And at some point, hopefully, President Obama, Speaker Pelosi will figure this out and decide, you know what, let's do a proposal like I've introduced last year and we will introduce here in a few weeks, an actual balanced budget.
Jim,
one that scales back spending. It's not my job or your job to create jobs. It's the private sector. It's our job to set a framework where economic growth can happen. That's what our function should be. And we keep making the environment tough for jobs to be created.
Gentlemen, let me just ask you something that I think both of you do agree on. We're talking about TARP. Both of you were against the TARP bailouts. It was discussed today. Senator Judd Gregg was disputing Peter Orszag in what should be done with the money that is returned from the banks. It got quite heated. Let me just play that sound and then get your reaction.
Sure. One of the lingering problems in our financial markets, however, is access to credit for small businesses. It's why in this budget we're...
No. You can't make that type of statement with any legitimacy.
Okay.
You cannot make that statement. This is the law.
Small businesses are not suffering from
Let me tell you what the law says. Let me read it to you again, because you don't appear to understand the law. The law is very clear. The monies recouped from the TARP shall be paid into the general fund of the Treasury for the reduction of the public debt. It's not for a piggy bank because you're concerned about lending to small businesses.
All right. Well, Jim Jordan, whose side do you take in that argument?
The senator is right. Look, the TARP money was out. We were against it. We thought it was the wrong approach. But when it comes back, it should be used to pay down the deficit and reduce the national debt. But again, this is the Obama administration wants to take that money because they adhere to this mindset that says, you know what? we're the ones who are going to decide who's going to get help in the private sector and who isn't. We're going to tax the big banks. They're talking about this big fee. Oh, but the small banks, we're going to give them money so you can loan out to certain people who they're picking the winners and losers in the economy. And that's a very dangerous road to travel
Dennis
down. Because
Kucinich,
once you
today
start,
we
it's
had
tough to turn around.
Paul Volcker, who squeezed the inflation out of the economy in the early 80s, he came back on the stage to say that big banks that get in trouble should be free to fail. I am quoting him. Sounds like something you would say.
I would agree with that. You know, if you're too big to fail, you're too big to exist.
Right.
The problem is that a lot of these banks who are still in business are not loaning money to small businesses so that small businesses can survive, let alone thrive.
All right.
And so if we don't try to come up with some means of getting money to those small businesses, if we're going to wait for the banks, you're going to have more small business failures.
All right. Well,
That's
on the
the
issue
problem we have
of
right
banks
now.
being free to fail, something that we all agree on, we have to end it there. Dennis Kucinich, Jim Jordan, we should do this at least once a week. We really appreciate you coming in. Thanks, guys.
We will. We always have to shake hands, buddy.
That's a nice image. And we want to know what you folks think.